So here today we have the Athletics German football writer and also part of the Totally Football Show Euro edition, Seb Stafford-Bloor, and also Andy Jones, who covered Vincent Kompany's 2-year reign at Burnley. Seb, let's go with you first. You were there for the Athletic, Wolfsburg versus Bayern Munich, which Bayern Munich managed to win 3-2. Serge Gnabry with the winner. But fair to say, quite a chaotic start for Kompany, right?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway is that it was a good performance with about 20 minutes of chaos in the middle of it. And I think I got to half time and with Bayern one up and playing really well and actually showing a lot of new interesting ideas. Michael Olise played pretty well on his debut. I was feeling pretty good about my copy. About 600 words in, and thought, this is going to be pretty easy. And then, unfortunately, there was some very familiar themes from last season. Really careless defensive moments, which seemed to rattle players and seemed to remind them, of where the frailties lie in this team. And it went bad, but then I think it's also equally fair. And this is something that Vincent Kompany said in his press conference. He sort of saluted his team's resilience and their willingness to put everything right. And I think they came out just about in credit. And in Kompany's defense, the problems that showed on Sunday were inherited. So he's there to fix those issues, whether he can or not, a different question, of course. But very much a work in progress, and a real patchwork of a performance.
Yeah, how much? I mean, very tricky to ask this question for any Bayern coach, really. I'm talking about pressures to get results immediately because, it's fair to say Vincent Kompany probably wasn't the first choice for this position, was he? And that
Probably
kind of
not.
pressure on
No.
your shoulders, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, this is going to be a theme. We're not going to get away from this for quite a while because, as you say, everybody knows that he was probably fifth or sixth choice at best. Bayern's managerial search, coaching search was very public and it was mocked pretty widely. And so what that does is it creates a situation where regardless of, even if a company had come to England, it come to Germany from, a solid mid-table finish in England with Burnley or, sneaking into the Conference League, as unlikely as that sounds, there would still be this sense that, well, you weren't really supposed to be here. And so there's going to be a lot of cynicism towards everything. And that's, it goes without saying that is going to, the main bellwether, of course, is going to be whether he wins. Any Bayern manager is there to do that. But then there's going to also be this micro focus around everything that happens. So instead of talking about, okay, good comeback win in Wolfsburg not the strongest, missing a few key players yesterday, they're a little bit under strength, but it was a win. It was a win away from home, and it was a win away from home, having been behind with 30 minutes left to play. And yet we're still assessing, well, how are you going to fix this? Do you have the qualities to do that? The players that you left out. So, for instance, Leon Goretzka didn't play yesterday. Also, Kimmich was moved into midfield, but with the caveat that João Palhinha is sitting on the bench, potentially ready to take his place or force him to move back to fullback. The question is going to be, and the focus is going to come on how Kompany deals with those issues, specifically the big political challenges that Bayern Munich pose. And his past and his lack of experience, I can't see a situation in which all of a sudden there's a big result where people forget about what happened over the summer. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah. Thanks for that, man. Andy, let's bring you in here. Firstly, happy birthday, respect
Very
to the
much.
cause, joining us today. I'm just, we're all looking at Vincent Kompany at Bayern Munich, and as a fan of football, even I was surprised to see that appointment. But respect to the man. I'm sure he'll step up. But any comparisons you've seen with this start at Bayern Munich compared to, I guess, a start at Burnley? Obviously, he inherited a team that had just been relegated, so there was definitely pressure on his shoulders there, but very different kind of pressure at Bayern, though, right?
Yeah, big time. I think the opening game quite a contrast because Burnley won 1-0 against Huddersfield and completely controlled the game. There was barely any drama. It was very, oh, this is great. It didn't have the back and forth as his opening game with Bayern did, I guess. I think there are quite a few differences in that. Obviously it's Bayern Munich, but he's inheriting a squad, as Seb's talked about, with underlying problems. Where at Burnley, he arrived with about 8 players who were still in the building, so he was able to completely rebuild a squad in his image, pretty much immediately and was able to do it without having to ship off a lot of players or make too many difficult decisions, because ultimately a lot of players went out the door. So it was very much a clean slate. But I think the similarities in the way he's worked, from reading, a couple of the pieces that Seb's done, in the way he wants to stamp his imprint on the side straight away, and I imagine, you are beginning to see the blueprints of what he wants to do with the team, come to fruition pretty quickly. That's what he was able to do with Burnley, and it'll be a challenge because obviously it's a tougher competition, tougher opposition, and than Burnley probably faced in the Championship with the quality that they had. But I think what will be interesting is to see what happens next, because his start at Burnley wasn't the smoothest. There was a lot of draws, or too many draws in there, but they were from a position of strength, and that did go 1-up but couldn't go 2-0, and then they get pegged back by a silly goal. And the defensive frailties will be interesting, because that's a little bit of what you saw at the start of the season with Burnley in that first season. Mistakes, or opposition were basically having 2 or 3 shots and one of them was going in. And it was just that. But once they fixed that, they ended up having the best defensive record in the league, in the Championship. Now in the Premier League, it was a very different story in terms of that defensive record. But he was able to. The longer you played together, especially that first season, you could see that style coming in more and more. And I think a lot of the things he's tried to implement at Bayern seems to be what he was putting in place at Burnley, albeit, as you say, it's a massive pressure difference. Burnley had sort of set in that 2-year plan of that's what senior sources told me, was that it was a 2-year plan to get back in the Premier League. So it wasn't necessarily you've got to get us up this year. But I think there was an underlying pressure, especially from the supporters, that they thought, we want to be back up straight away. And that's what he delivered. So, he did rise to that and was able to put, a record-breaking team together. So he did pretty well in that first season.
Yeah, he rose to it, and I like that. But Seb, Bayern Munich is a different beast, man. You talk about what he's inherited. You're also looking at some senior players in that dressing room with some big attitudes, man. Like, real talk. Tuchel struggled with that. Nagelsmann struggled with that in many respects. But also, you've got this Bayern hierarchy as well that he's got to please as well. I mean, this is more of a statesman-like job now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're riding the tiger. I think that's pretty fair. What I will say about the hierarchy, I think the hierarchy is healthier than it has been in some time. Uli Hoeneß is Uli Hoeneß, and he will talk and he will give opinions, but then he's also the architect of what Bayern Munich is today. It does not exist without him in its current form. So, that's not going to change. But I think the remodeling process that began last summer, with Christoph Freund arriving at the club, Max Bell joining at the beginning of 2024. I think what you have there in a board member for sport, which is Abel, and sports director Freund, is you have senior technical executives who think in the same way about the game and have similar views on how to build a squad, what kind of players you're supposed to bring in, and what the best way of making the most of them is. And I think one of the reasons why Bayern are in this situation is because that hadn't existed for some time. So, for instance, the big issue, I suppose, or one of the big issues, is probably the state of the defense. And there have been some really, really talented coaches who've come through that club recently who have not been able to cope with it or not been able to remedy those issues. And that's because it was assembled in quite a chaotic way. You walk around the kind of looking at the sort of the top shelf in the Defender Superstore, be like, yeah, I'll have one of those. And does it fit together? Well, worry about that later. We'll just get a really good coach to deal with it. And that doesn't work. And the legacy of that is what you see now. And I think some of what you saw against Wolfsburg, which is defensive players who individually really capable, talented, lots of attributes. Do they work together? Don't know. Also quite telling that, you bring on Eric Dyer towards the end of the game and it suddenly looks better. And it's just interesting that you need that counterbalance, which is, quite a modest player, to sort out some of these sort of big ticket issues. And so that's the storm within which Kompany finds himself. And it's also worth remembering, and I think I make this point pretty much every time we talk, you cannot underestimate how strong the media focus is on Bayern Munich. It is not like just being Man United in England. It's like being Man United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester City, Spurs in England. And did I say Liverpool? Let's add Liverpool there as well.
Yeah, add Liverpool.
And so it's total. And it's not just a question of your tactics are no good, your player selections are no good. Kompany will be judged on how he deals with these relationships and how he deals with these individual people, and how much access he provides academy players to the first team. And you said it's kind of like being a statesman. It's absolutely right. It is a much bigger job than just being a football coach. Even if his position has been carved out to be more of an employee, he won't be treated as such externally, maybe internally, but not by the outside world.
Andy, I'm just thinking about something that Seb wrote about, especially with the way Kompany has started, especially in pre-season, and being able to articulate his ideas clearly to this team. It's still too early to figure out whether or not he's going to be that top manager. But surely, if you're going to take over a big club like Bayern Munich, those kind of principles and ideas and being able to articulate them clearly will build confidence in the players, and probably in a very similar way it did in Burnley.
Yeah, I think he did a speech with the squad in, I think, a first or second day at Burnley, where he basically got everyone in the canteen and spoke for 15 minutes, and it was a really powerful speech where he basically underlined everything that he wanted. And from that, then it's meetings after meetings after meetings and loads of work on the training pitch, and he will never change from his principles and his ideas. There were tweaks and adaptations, especially in the second season of Burnley, when he tried to implement them totally at the start of the season. Didn't work, and he had to sort of change slightly, but he never went away from the ideas that he had. And you saw that in the first season, where Burnley played on their terms in every single game, and they played their way. So I think, yeah, it's important, but I think he's a character that commands respect. Now, I understand that he's not achieved, or certainly not got the CV as a manager, but he has been at the top of the game and achieved a lot. And so I think he has the respect of players, and I think that certainly helps putting a message across. And if things are going in the right direction, which then players are going to get behind it. So I guess no matter who you are, really, if things are going well, that's the way it is. And this will be the test now, is when the real stuff starts. I think pre-season in a sense is probably, it can be the easiest part, because if you come in with all your fresh ideas and everything sounds great and training's fun and enjoyable, and there's a point to everything, which is what a lot of Burnley players talked about in that first pre-season, where every training session was really intense and really competitive, and there was a reason behind everything that they were doing. So I think this is the key point. But he was very, very good at Burnley at getting that message across and forging that identity. He was given the keys to the club at Burnley. It was very much a blank slate of, you go and do what you want to do. Now, there are issues with that when it's not going well, as Burnley found in the second season, and ultimately are still feeling a little bit of the effects of now, when you give someone that much power. But he was allowed to shape the club in his image and buy the players that he wanted to buy that fitted his system. And you don't have that same power at Bayern, definitely not, because of the way the structure works. But he will go in with that mindset of, I'm the main man, so I'm going to do what I'm going to do. He was able to harmonise a Burnley dressing room in the second season when things weren't going well. That did the road, and there were cliques and there were problems in there. Not huge, but there were certainly more problems. But that's to be expected when the team's not winning. When you come into a team and they win it basically immediately and have the season that they had in that first season, everyone's going to be on board. It's difficult to find players that are going to be too unhappy when you win in every week.
I think there's been some evidence of that at Bayern already, certainly in terms of the authority. Like, Andy's absolutely right. He doesn't have the control over the club that he did at Burnley. Nothing like it. He just has a role to fill. He's an employee. At the same time, I think through the summer, when there was kind of a laser focus on his coaching methods, it's clear that he was going to approach those sessions with real authority. So he was stepping in. He was actually being he was doing demos within training, making sure players understood, like, for instance, like how much distance he wanted his defenders to give an attacking player with their back to goal, that kind of stuff. He was going to the sessions, and rightly so, as a Premier League winning centre half, he's one of the great players of his era. So that worked pretty well. But that was at a period of summer where all the players who'd been at the European Championship were still on holiday. So you had young academy players or fringe first teamers or players who hadn't made their national squads, and it's different. And I mean, there's at this point, Andy mentioned also it's all fine when it's going well. And there was a moment in yesterday's press conference when obviously, Bundesliga press conferences all happen in German, and Kompany speaks excellent German, really, really good German. But then at some point, I'm not even quite sure why, but he switched to English to give one answer when he wanted to talk about mentality and those kind of things. And it was funny. It was kind of like, in the moment, it was sort of, this guy he's urbane, cosmopolitan. He can, speak a million different languages and all good. But you just heard the sort of the startings of a bit of a murmuring in the room. You're going to do what? You're going to talk in English? And I think also something we touched on before, but when you start being authoritative within a training session, which includes senior players who've won a lot of things already, who are used to having their first team place almost assured, I think that if you have a strong personality mixed with other strong personalities who are earning an awful lot of money, it can be tricky. And so this is going to be a really difficult thing to navigate. Like, for instance, Michael Olise, I thought, played really well for an hour in Wolfsburg. It was really impressive. I think a lot of German Bundesliga fans kind of appreciated, hey, this is a pretty good player. What happens when Leroy Sané is back from injury and available to play from the right too? Like, how is João Palhinha going to, fit into that midfield? How is, if Leon Goretzka doesn't leave the club, what happens to Leon Goretzka for the season?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest interesting thing is he's inheriting a lot of players, whereas at Burnley he bought his players in, and these players essentially signed for him rather than signing for Burnley. And I think that's the big difference here, is that he's now dealing with players who are already there and they haven't signed for the club because of Vincent Kompany, and that's going to be the big difference of how he deals with that.
Okay, well, let's move on because Seb, we've just spoken about, the big job he's got on his hands. Especially trying to turn around what happened last season for Bayern Munich in particular. But, what do you expect from the league this season? Because for that reason as well, it's quite interesting. Bayern weren't in the running in the same way. Certain new players like Leverkusen emerged as, Bundesliga favourites who ended up winning it in the end. But, this could potentially be one of the most exciting leagues this season in Europe.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Leverkusen won the title by 18 points, so I think they have to be favourites. I know people disagree with that almost reflexively, because what, Bayern Munich are not favourite? No, I'm sure bookmakers somewhere believe they might be, but logically, no, I don't really. I think there's a lot of ground to make up, and Leverkusen played very well on Friday night. So across the league, the two other contenders, I don't really see Stuttgart as a contender for the title. I think they're a top four side. They've got a little bit of a defensive crisis going on at the moment, so let's not rush to judgment on their defeat in Freiburg. There's a lot of shuffling, there's a lot of moving parts, and there will be some transfer activity before the window ends there. Leipzig are an interesting one. They started slowly. They won. They beat Bochum, but they survived a Willi Orban red card to get over the line 1-0. I think there's so much talent there. The big success, or two big successes, Xavi Simons is back. One of the great talents in European football anywhere, a fabulous, fabulous player. Wanted by Bayern as well, but he's decided to stay at Leipzig for another year. But they've also kept Benjamin Šeško and Lewis Openda together, who, if that fires, that is a very troubling forward combination to have to deal with, because it's got all the attributes you could want really in a pairing. And they've added Antonio Nusa, who's a fascinating player. Obviously had to deal with some disappointments back in January, failed move to Brentford, rumoured move to Tottenham, never materialised for whatever reason. He was of interest to Chelsea before then, that didn't work out. But scored on his debut and looks like a very, very exciting addition. And I think they're a threat. They'll be overlooked because they're Leipzig, and because the media in Germany don't want to talk about Leipzig. We know why, that's a different podcast, but they are talented and they are a danger. And also really interesting, they play Leverkusen on match day 2 next weekend. So that is probably as good a game as there is anywhere in Europe. And I could see, I like Bayern. I think Bayern will get stronger. I think Bayern have enough talent to get over the line. I think ultimately Champions League focus will drain something from Leverkusen's domestic form. But I think this is going to be a really, really compelling, probably 3-horse race.
Oh, keep your eyes on the Bundesliga. You heard it here first from Seb Stafford-Bloor. Right, let's move on. Andy, look, I'm not the only one that saw the massive, massive clash. It was a clip anyway with Johan Berg Gudmundsson and company at Burnley. I think it was off the documentary, wasn't it? We've all seen it from Mission Burnley on Sky Sports. What does this tell us about company's desire to win at all costs? And also, will a lot of fans have taken that clip out of context and just seen him as a bit of an annoying manager?
I think it can be taken out of context because when you sort of speak to what people, it's quite a common training ground thing. It happens it'd be amazing if your club who you support it hasn't happened that because it's an intense environment and company certainly makes it intense because as he said, his words speak a lot for sort of what it means to him and how important this is to him. Life or death, I think, is what he said. And that's the way he approaches it. And, he's all in on everything. So if he's not seeing the player put in the work and, the desire and doesn't have the desire or the determination that he's got, every single day, this is a guy who works 12 to 14-hour days. He's first in, he's last out. He just doesn't stop, essentially. I don't know how he has time for anything else, to be honest, because he is that sort of focused on the task. So if he's not seeing someone pulling the weight, then he's going to pull them up. And if people aren't living up to the standards that he set, because he walked to Burnley and set the standard straight away by his work ethic and everything like that. So if he doesn't see that from someone, then he's going to pull them up on it. It was interesting that it was Johan Berg Gudmundsson because there's sort of the long running joke about him is that he never smiles. So Sean Dyche used to always sort of take the mick out of him a little bit in press conferences because he always looked unhappy. So it was quite interesting that he was the one who company picked on as sort of the moaner, if you like, in that situation. I think there was a sense that sort of the intensity, was too much for some of the Burnley players in the end, and I can understand how if you're being told, every week, all the meetings, all the sessions, and then on the pitch you're getting beat every week, and it's not looking pretty. And I think that it looked like it would have been around that sort of November, December time when things were looking really, really bleak. You can sort of understand the frustrations and the weariness and maybe the little grumblings that you might have as a player as things just continue to sort of erode. So the question is that when you have the bigger egos and that we've talked about in this podcast, how do they react? How does Harry Kane, react to something like that? Or, it's interesting. I don't think Kompany will change his approach, but how will the players take to it? That's the interesting thing, I think, about it.
Seb, Andy speaks about Harry Kane. I'm also thinking about someone like Leroy Sané. How does Kompany approach a player like that who's got a very strong sense of who he is and what he wants to do on a day-to-day basis? Can he get away with such ferocity in front of players like that?
I think he can with someone like Sané because they played together, and Sané came to Manchester City when he was very young, but when Kompany was a very senior figure, and so that relationship will probably survive. I think we go back to the same old point. It's going to depend on whether they're winning or not.
Yeah.
Like I think people will be open-minded and they'll enjoy someone who I think for now people will enjoy the fact that unlike Thomas Tuchel, who, I mean, if you go back a year, was sort of telling anybody who would listen about, how ill-suited the squad was to play his way, what players were missing, what he needed that he didn't have. I think at the moment, Kompany is sounding some very different notes. He's been really positive. He's taken great pains to kind of praise players for good things. So instead of focusing on what went wrong yesterday, he talked about, we said at the beginning, he talked about, how much he admired their work ethic, how willing they were to change the game and to make sure they got that win away from home from a difficult spot. So he's playing a different character, and that's pretty smart. But ultimately, winning everything's fine for now, I think, is the simple answer. I can't elaborate on that really.
I know you were out in Seoul watching a lot of the pre-seasons. Obviously, he didn't have some of the bigger characters because they were out at the Euros at that point. But from the team that he had at his disposal, how did they take to his sort of ideologies? How did they take to adapt into his philosophy?
Yeah, it seemed really positive. There's, a little bit in Seoul. I was there to cover Spurs, and actually, like one of my journalistic deficiencies is I can only focus on one team at a time. But that's a problem for my employers, right?
That's a different conversation.
Well, we can have that on the podcast live. I think one of the things I took away was how receptive from yesterday was how receptive some of the senior players and how rejuvenated a few of them looked. So Serge Gnabry played really well, scored the winning goal, but played really well. Kingsley Coman came on and was very dynamic and looked very focused on what he had been told to do and was very effective, played very well. Thomas Müller is kind of a self-motivating character, but I can't imagine Müller ever giving less than 100% for anybody just because Bayern Munich means so much to him. But then look around the rest of the team. I know he made a bad mistake for the penalty. Sacha Boey had a really good first half, combined very well with Elise and Kane. That was really, really encouraging. Joshua Kimmich looks to, I don't know what Kimmich's future is position-wise, and I have some reservations about whether he can play in a two with Pavlovic, but I thought that he was clearly working well under instruction, as he had done the previous weekend in the Pokal, in a 4-0 win against Ulm. He played in the same position, played very well. So there's clear evidence that some of these senior guys are responding to the ideas being set in front of them, people being open-minded. The people who are not in the team don't know. Okay. I think the truth of it is that Bayern would have preferred to have moved on a few more players than they have this summer. Haven't managed to do that, so there lies a bit of a test. But there's certainly enough to be positive about it. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I like that. And Andy, even in that clip, you talk about this sense of life and death, or life or death with Kompany. It's clear that this is a massive gamble, but also clear that you don't take this kind of gamble if you're not ambitious as a coach or someone who wants to do stuff at the top echelons of football. That's probably really good news for Bayern Munich moving forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think Kompany's journey, I think his vision was always to be at the top of the game as a manager, because everything he does, he aims to be the best at. So I think if that's your mindset, then you're going to aim big, I guess. And I think that's important, because you've got to walk into a club and feel like you deserve to be there. And whether the outside noise thinks the same or not doesn't really matter. Because I think he said in that introductory press conference, I think he was asked about the process, and he said, well, they picked me, so they've made the right decision, or something along those lines. And it was like, fair enough, because it takes a lot to say that, something like that. You've got to have confidence to sort of to put yourself out there like that and say something like that. So I think he walks in as, whether he thinks it's maybe too soon or not, because I think, at the time when he was linked to the Chelsea and the Tottenham jobs, I think there was an element of, do a stay at Burnley, do a keep learning, and there was a lot of noises, before Bayern will, come in and try and get him, that he'd taken that same view again of whether, another season in the Championship with Burnley was the most beneficial thing for his development as a coach. Then Bayern Munich walk in the door, and then it was sort of like, yeah, see you later, which is understandable to an extent. So I think it stands him in good stead, because he thinks he deserves to be there, and he thinks that I think he'll understand that he's not seen as, or is not a top coach yet, but I think he will see himself as developing into that top coach and being one of the best in the business eventually, because that's the way he looks at it, and that's the challenge he sets himself, is to be the best. And that's what you see, and why you see the work ethic and everything that he puts into everything. It's because it's that desire to be better than everyone else, and that's what helped him as a player get to where he got to as a player, and that's what he hopes as a manager will help get to where he wants to get to as a manager.
Yeah, so let's finish on this. First game in, 1 win. Yeah. Still a long way to go, obviously. But we've spoken about a lot of issues that Bayern had from defense, but also midfield. Let's not forget. João Paulinho didn't play. Freiburg against Bayern Munich this Sunday. Are we starting to see the formation of, a team in the likeness of Kompany that's actually going to address a lot of the ills that Bayern Munich had last season?
Yeah, it's a really hard one to answer. It is a good question. I think the main issue is, I think it's quite, it's a single issue which has a lot of different effects. I think if you crack the midfield, I think you create a situation where, like, the two players at the heart of the defence have reliable passing options into midfield. Bayern need to have players in those deep midfield positions who can take the ball on the half turn and are happy taking the ball under pressure, but who can also protect the defenders, because it's just not a strength. It's a weakness of the side and everybody knows it. And I think if you're able to do that, if you're able to fix the midfield chemistry, then without the ball, you're more secure, but also with the ball, you alleviate the effects of an opponent pressing your defenders high. That is what Wolfsburg did to them. I mean, Wolfsburg without Jonas Wind, who's the feature centre forward, he started on the bench, but is nowhere near fit. And all the chances they managed to create, I think it was about an XG rating of about 2.4 or something. It all came from turnovers and presses and mistakes. Wolfsburg didn't create anything. So this is the thing that has to change, and it's not going to happen overnight. There are going to be many more days like Wolfsburg, many more goals conceded which look ugly. It's just going to be whether over time the players can develop some proper faith in that part of the pitch, which they clearly don't have at the moment. You can see the nervousness when they come out of the defensive zones, and Leverkusen are not far away. I mean, they play each other just after the international break, so this needs to get better quickly.
Okay, brilliant stuff. Seb, thank you so much for joining us, and Andy as well on your birthday. Respect to you, brother. Thanks for being with us once again. And do not forget, you can get in touch with us by emailing tafcpod@theathletic.com. We'll be back tomorrow looking at the biggest talking point in the world of football. Thanks for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.